Hello, guys. I'm a bit early today because I need to visit some of my drawing classes afterwards. That's why I decided to start just a couple of minutes earlier than usual. Yeah, I hope you will like today's excerpt from the chapter, and I hope that you'll also elicit some good ideas for your daily life. I mean, the book is not only some sort of a philosophical tractate, but it really includes some practical perspectives into our life. So. Yeah, let us start reading that. This will be the first half of the chapter, and I hope you really like it. 1001 Days, or How Not to Be a Sucker, which brings us to the black swan problem in its original form. Imagine someone of authority and rank operating in a place where rank matters, say a government agency or a large corporation. He would be a verbose political commentator on Fox News, stuck in front of you at the health club. Impossible to avoid looking at the screen. Chairman of a company discussing the bright future ahead. A platonic medical doctor who has categorically ruled out the utility of mother's milk because he did not see anything special in it. Or a Harvard Business School professor who does not laugh at your jokes. He takes what he knows a little too seriously. Say that a prankster surprises him one day by surreptitiously sliding a thin feather up his nose during a moment of relaxation. How would his dignified pompousness fare after the surprise? Contrast his authoritative demeanor with the shock of being hit by something totally unexpected that he does not understand. For a brief moment, before he regains his bearings, you will see disarray in his face. I confess having developed an incorrigible taste for this kind of prank during my first sleepaway summer camp. Introduced into the nostril of a sleeping camper, a feather would induce sudden panic. I spent part of my childhood practicing variations on the prank. In place of a thin feather, you can roll the corner of a tissue to make it long and narrow. I got some practice on my younger brother. An equally effective prank would be to drop an ice cube down someone's collar when he expects it least, say during an official dinner. I had to stop these pranks as I got deeper into adulthood, of course, but I am often involuntarily hit with such an image when bored out of my wits in meetings with serious looking business persons, dark suits and standardized minds, theorizing, explaining things, or talking about random events with plenty of because in their conversation. I zoom in on one of them and imagine the ice cube sliding down his back. It would be less fashionable, though certainly more spectacular, if you put a living mouse there, particularly if the person is ticklish and is wearing a tie, which would block the rodent's normal route of exit. I am safe, since I never wear ties except at funerals. Pranks can be compassionate. I remember in my early trading days, at age 25 or so, when money was starting to become easy. I would take taxis, and if the driver spoke skeletal English and looked particularly depressed, I'd give him a $100 bill as a tip, just to give him a little jolt and get a kick out of his surprise. I'd watch him unfold the bill and look at it with some degree of consternation. $1 million certainly would have been better, but it was not within my means. It was also a simple hedonic experiment. It felt elevating to make someone's day with a trifle of $100. I eventually stopped. We all become stingy and calculating when our wealth grows and we start taking money seriously. I don't need much help from fate to get larger scale entertainment. Reality provides such forced revisions of beliefs at quite a high frequency. Many are quite spectacular. In fact, the entire knowledge seeking enterprise is based on taking conventional wisdom and accepted scientific beliefs and shattering them into pieces with new counterintuitive evidence, whether at a micro scale, every scientific discovery is an attempt to produce a micro black swan, or at a larger one, as with Poincaré's and Einstein's relativity. Scientists may be in the business of laughing at their predecessors, but owing to an array of human mental dispositions, few realize that someone will laugh at their beliefs in the disappointingly near future. In this case, my readers and I are laughing at the present state of social knowledge. These big guns do not see the inevitable overhaul of their work coming, which means that you can usually count on them to be in for a surprise. How to learn from the turkey. The Uber philosopher Bertrand Russell presents a particularly toxic variant of my surprise jolt in his illustration of what people in his line of business call the problem of induction or problem of inductive knowledge, capitalized for its seriousness. Certainly, the mother of all problems in life. How can we logically go from specific instances to reach general conclusions? How do we know what we know? How do we know that what we have observed from given objects and events suffices to enable us to figure out their other properties? There are traps built into any kind of knowledge gained from observation. Consider a turkey that is fed every day. Every single feeding will firm up the bird's belief that it is the general rule of life to be fed every day by friendly members of the human race, looking out for its best interests, as a politician would say. On the afternoon of the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, something unexpected will happen to the turkey. It will incur a revision of belief. Since Russell's original example used a chicken, this is the enhanced North American adaptation. The rest of this chapter will outline the black swan problem in its original form. How can we know the future given knowledge of the past? Or, more generally, how can we figure out properties of the infinite unknown based on the finite known? Think of the feeding again. What can a turkey learn about what is in store for it tomorrow from the events of yesterday? A lot, perhaps, but certainly a little less than it thinks, and it is just a little less that may make all the difference. The turkey problem can be generalized to any situation where the same hand that feeds you can be the one that wrings your neck. Consider the case of the increasingly integrated German Jews in the 1930s, or my description in Chapter 1 of how the population of Lebanon got lulled in a false sense of security by the appearance of mutual friendliness and tolerance. Let us go one step further and consider induction's most worrisome aspect, learning backward. Consider that the turkey's experience may have, rather than no value, a negative value. It learned from observation, as we are all advised to do. Hey, after all, this is what is believed to be the scientific method. Its confidence increased as the number of friendly feedings grew, and it felt increasingly safe even though the slaughter was more and more imminent. Consider that the feeling of safety reached its maximum when the risk was at the highest. But the problem is even more general than that. It strikes at the nature of empirical knowledge itself. Something has worked in the past until, well, it unexpectedly no longer does, and what we have learned from the past turns out to be at best irrelevant or false, at worst viciously misleading. Figure 1. 1001 Days of History. A turkey before and after Thanksgiving. The history of a process over 1,000 days tells you nothing about what is to happen next. This naive projection of the future from the past can be applied to anything. Figure 1 provides the prototypical case of the problem of induction as encountered in real life. You observe a hypothetical variable for 1,000 days. It could be anything with a few mild transformations. Book sales, blood pressure, crimes, a personal income, a given stock, the interest on a loan, or Sunday attendance at a specific Greek Orthodox church. You subsequently derive solely from past data a few conclusions concerning the properties of the pattern, with projections for the next 1,000, even 5,000 days. On the 1,001st day, boom, a big change takes place that is completely unprepared for by the past. Consider the surprise of the Great War. After the Napoleonic conflicts, the world had experienced a period of peace that would lead an observer to believe in the disappearance of severely destructive conflicts. Yet, surprise, it turned out to be the deadliest conflict up until then in the history of mankind. Note that after the event, you start predicting the possibility of other outliers happening locally, that is, in the process you were just surprised by, but not elsewhere. After the stock market crash of 1987, half of America's traders braced for another one every October, not taking into account that there was no antecedent for the first one. We worried too late, exposed. Mistaking a naive observation of the past as something definitive or representative of the future is the one and only cause of our inability to understand the black swan. It would appear to a quoting dilettante that is one of those writers and scholars who fill up their texts with phrases from some dead authority, that, as phrased by Hobbes, from like antecedents flow like consequence. Those who believe in the unconditional benefits of past experience should consider this pearl of wisdom allegedly voiced by a famous ship's captain. But in all my experience, I have never been in any accident of any sort worth speaking about. I have seen but one vessel in distress in all my years at sea. I never saw a wreck, and never have been wrecked, nor was I ever in any predicament that threatened to end in disaster of any sort. E. J. Smith, 1907, Captain RMS Titanic. Captain Smith's ship sank in 1912 in what became the most talked about shipwreck in history. Statements like those of Captain Smith are so common that it is not even funny. In September 2006, a fund called Amaranth, ironically named after a flower that never dies, had to shut down after it lost close to $7 billion in a few days, the most impressive loss in trading history. Another irony, I shared office space with the traders. A few days prior to the event, the company made a statement to the effect that investors should not worry because they had 12 risk managers, people who use models of the past to produce risk measures on the odds of such an event. Even if they had 112 risk managers, there would be no meaningful difference. They still would have blown up. Clearly, you cannot manufacture more information than the past can deliver. If you buy 100 copies of the New York Times, I am not too certain that it would help you gain incremental knowledge of the future. We just don't know how much information there is in the past. Trained to be dull. Similarly, think of a bank chairman whose institution makes steady profits over a long time, only to lose everything on a single reversal of fortune. Traditionally, bankers of the lending variety have been pear-shaped, clean-shaven, and dressed in possibly in most comforting and boring manner, in dark suits, white shirts, and red ties. Indeed, for their lending business, banks hire dull people and train them to be even more dull, but this is for show. If they look conservative, it is because their loans only go bust on rare, very rare occasions. There is no way to gauge the effectiveness of their lending activity by observing it over a day, a week, a month, or even a century. In the summer of 1982, large American banks lost close to all their past earnings cumulatively, about everything they ever made in the history of American banking. Everything. They had been lending to South and Central American countries that all defaulted at the same time, an event of an exceptional nature. So, it took just one summer to figure out that this was a sucker's business and that all their earnings came from a very risky game. All that while, the bankers led everyone, especially themselves, into believing that they were conservative. They're not conservative, just phenomenally skilled at self deception by burying the possibility of a large, devastating loss under the rug. In fact, the travesty repeated itself a decade later with the risk conscious large banks once again under financial strain, many of them near bankrupt, after the real estate collapse of the early 1990s, in which the now defunct savings and loan industry required a taxpayer funded bailout of more than $500 billion. The Federal Reserve Bank protected them at our expense. When conservative bankers make profits, they get the benefits. When they're hurt, we pay the costs. After graduating from Wharton, I initially went to work for Bankers Trust, now defunct. There, the chairman's office, rapidly forgetting about the story of 1982, broadcast the results of every quarter with an announcement explaining how smart, profitable, conservative, and good looking they were. It was obvious that their profits were simply cash borrowed from destiny with some random payback time. I have no problem with risk taking, just please, please do not call yourself conservative and act superior to other businesses who are not as vulnerable to black swans. Another recent event is the almost instant bankruptcy in 1998 of a financial investment company, hedge fund, called Long Term Capital Management, which used the methods and risks expertise of two Nobel economists who were called geniuses, but were in fact using phony bell curve style mathematics while managing to convince themselves that it was great science and thus turning the entire financial establishment into suckers. One of the largest trading losses ever in history took place in almost the blink of an eye with no warning signal. More, much more on that in chapter 17. The main tragedy of the high impact, low probability event comes from the mismatch between the time taken to compensate someone and the time one needs to be comfortable that he is not making a bet against the rare event. People have an incentive to bet against it or to game the system since they can be paid a bonus reflecting their yearly performance, when in fact all they're doing is producing illusory profits that they will lose back one day. Indeed, the tragedy of capitalism is that since the quality of the returns is not observable for past data, owners of companies, namely shareholders, can be taken for a ride by the managers who show returns and cosmetics profitability, but in fact might be taking hidden risks. A black swan is relative to knowledge. From the standpoint of the turkey, the non-feeding of the 1001st day is a black swan. For the butcher, it is not, since its occurrence is not unexpected. So, you can see here that the black swan is a sucker's problem. In other words, it occurs relative to your expectation. You realize that you can eliminate a black swan by science if you're able, or by keeping an open mind. Of course, like the LTSM people, you can create black swans with science by giving people confidence that the black swan cannot happen. This is when science turns normal citizens into suckers. Note that these events do not have to be instantaneous surprises. Some of the historical fractures I mentioned in chapter 1 have lasted a few decades, like, say, the computer that brought consequential effects on society without its invasion of our lives being noticeable from day to day. Some black swans can come from the slow building up of incremental changes in the same direction, as with books that sell large amounts over years, never showing up on the bestseller lists, or from technologies that creep up on us slowly but surely. Likewise, the growth of Nasdaq stocks in the late 1990s took a few years, but the growth would seem sharper if you were to plot it on a long historical line. Matters should be seen on some relative, not absolute time scale. Earthquake lasted minutes, 9/11 lasted hours, but historical changes and technological implementations are black swans that can take decades. In general, positive black swans take time to show their effect, while negative ones happen very quickly. It is much easier and much faster to destroy than to build. During the Lebanese War, my parents' house in Amiens and my grandfather's house in a nearby village were destroyed in just a few hours, dynamited by my grandfather's enemies who controlled the area. It took 7,000 times longer, 2 years, to rebuild them. This asymmetry in time scales explains the difficulty in reversing time. So, this was the first half of the fourth chapter of the book. I hope you liked it and that you enjoyed the time reading with me. Don't forget normally to download the chapter in advance if you want to get a bit ready for the reading and to get some peek behind the scenes of what I'm going to read next time. But now I'm saying goodbye till our next time. So next Sunday again we will be reading the book. Bye. See ya.